This kitten was adopted 9 times and returned every single time. No one could figure out why until a young trainee took him home. What she discovered left everyone speechless. This isn't just a story about a cat. It's a story about a secret no one dared to admit. But before we start our story, smash the like button. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. By this point, Simba had been at the animal shelter for 5 years. He was barely a kitten anymore, but he still very much looked like one, and everybody who came to the shelter to pick immediately fell in love with him and wanted to take him home. So why was poor Simba still here? The truth is that from those 5 years, Simba actually didn't spend that much time in the shelter. If he was present there, it would be at most 2 weeks before he was adopted by somebody. But the thing is that he just kept getting returned by the people who adopted him. This already started when he was brought into the shelter for the first time as only a 3-week-old kitten. His first owners had a cat who gave birth to 5 healthy kittens. But they inexplicably decided to keep 4 of them, and only Simba was handed over to the shelter without a word of explanation. Some eyebrows were raised at the shelter at the time, so they had Simba extensively checked by their on-call veterinarian. When all the test results showed that there was seemingly nothing wrong with the kitten, the shelter just concluded that he probably just got unlucky ending up here. They put him up for adoption that same day, and the very next day, somebody had already come in to adopt him. It wasn't every day that a shelter would have kittens up for adoption, as mostly older cats were brought in, so people who saw Simba knew this was a golden chance. The family he was going to seemed to be absolutely perfect. A young married couple with a 5-year-old daughter dying to get a kitten. The mother also worked from home, so there would always be people around to give Simba attention. Nobody at the shelter expected to ever see Simba again. But this would not turn out to be the case whatsoever. It only took 3 weeks before Simba was returned to the shelter by his new owners. The father had come alone with a happy and excited Simba in a box. He had obviously bonded with the men and had no idea it would be the last time he would see him. The men only gave a vague reason for returning Simba. That was obviously an excuse. Something about that was just not working out, as it was constantly too much time. It didn't make any sense based on what the shelter knew about the family. But the shelter decided not to ask too many questions at that time. If the family was unwilling to care for Simba, then the cat would be better off with them, and they were sure he would find a new owner who would absolutely love him in no time. This had to only be an incident, right? But this would turn out to not be an incident whatsoever. For some reason, it just kept happening. Every time Simba was adopted, he was eventually brought back to the shelter, and within 2 weeks, he was adopted again. The shelter had never seen anything like this before, and they just could not figure out why it was happening. The reasons for returning the poor kitten always seemed too shallow and weak, and they were also so different. At least some of them would have to be lies. Some said that Simba had way too much energy, while others claimed he wouldn't even get out of his bed. Some said that he was aggressive to other cats, while others said he was too scared of them to go to the park. It just didn't make any sense. The shelter was at a loss because what else could they do than put Simba up for adoption again? They could not just keep him at the shelter forever. This poor cat needed to find a forever home, but when he got returned for the 9th time, nobody had any hope left for that. It was also obvious that this constant horrible cycle started to take its toll on the kitten that everybody at the shelter loved so much. They could just see the sparkle in his eyes shine a little less bright every time he was put back into that case. It was heartbreaking. At this point, Simba was just sitting in the corner of his case, looking sad. His 9th owner had finally given the shelter a return reason that theory actually believed, that Simba just seemed not to trust him and just seemed unhappy overall. They would believe that all too well, everybody at the shelter just felt like they needed to find a solution to this problem. They all cared so much about this dog, and luckily for them, the solution actually came from a trainee named Stacy, who had been with them only for about 2 weeks. She was studying to become a veterinarian and volunteered at the shelter for 2 months. When Simba was returned by his most recent owner, it was the first time she saw the Kitten. She instantly fell in love. Despite meeting him in such a sad state, Stacy heard from others how lively Simba used to be and learned he'd been returned 9 times for different reasons. But that didn't deter her. She thought those owners just didn't understand him. Stacy believed she could give Simba the life he deserved. Living with her parents, she feared they might reject the idea, but surprisingly, they were completely on board. With her moving out soon, they had already considered getting another cat. Stacy quickly handled the paperwork and took Simba home that day. It was Simba's 10th adoption, and he appeared numb to the process. On the ride home, he wouldn't even look at her. Stacy knew regaining his trust would be difficult, but she was optimistic at least at first. Her parents welcomed Simba warmly. Her dad had already bought him a bed and bowl. Fortunately, the family already owned 3 other cats and had most supplies. Simba, being smaller, became the runt of the group. Still, something seemed off. He didn't interact much, just looked around, quiet and unsure. The other cats were much more social. Once they were let into the room, they started sniffing Simba curiously. One even brought him a toy. Slowly, Simba's guarded demeanor softened, and he began engaging. Encouraged, the family spent the rest of the day showering him with attention. They even took him to the store to pick a toy and baked him a treat. Simba wagged his tail all day. Stacy and her family were overjoyed. He seemed happy again. Had they finally cracked the mystery of this misunderstood cat? Within 24 hours, he transformed into the lively kitten everyone had described. Stacy updated the shelter with the good news. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. One morning, Simba was gone. His bed was empty. The family searched the house top to bottom, but he was nowhere. Panic set in for Stacy. She had promised the shelter she'd care for him, and now he vanished. She didn't want to break the news to the shelter just yet. Instead, she took a week off to focus on finding Simba. She asked every neighbor, combed the area, and looked everywhere but found nothing. It really looked like Simba disappeared into thin air. He was nowhere to be found. Stacy was extremely hurt by this. After a morning of asking and searching, Simba was still nowhere to be found. Nobody had seen him, so the next logical step was to put up posters. Stacy just hoped no one from the shelter would see them. She didn't want to disappoint them. 2 more days passed without a single response. Posters were everywhere, but Simba remained missing. Stacy finally accepted that she had to tell the shelter the truth. She was about to make the call when the phone rang. Someone had found Simba. The man on the line sounded upset and wouldn't explain much, but insisted Stacy come to his house. Her heart pounded as she drove nearly an hour to get there, wondering how Simba had ended up so far away. When she arrived, the man stood stiffly at his door, arms crossed, clearly agitated. He led her inside without much explanation, revealing a very sad-looking Simba locked in a cage. Stacy was ready to be angry until he explained. Simba had wandered into the man's yard. Without seeing any posters, the man checked Simba's collar and found the shelter's number. At first, Simba seemed calm, so the man let him walk freely inside. But then his dog entered the room and everything changed. Without warning, Simba attacked. The man barely stopped him in time and quickly locked Simba in the cage to protect both animals. He had called the shelter afterward, describing the cat. They immediately told him to contact Stacy. Fortunately, Simba wasn't hurt. But when Stacy checked her phone, she saw multiple missed calls from the shelter. She couldn't keep it a secret anymore. She thanked the man, apologized, and brought Simba back to the shelter. There, she learned the staff had already contacted several of Simba's previous owners. The results were shocking. Every single one had the same story. Simba had attacked other animals. That was the real reason they returned him, something they'd never admitted out of fear he might be euthanized. They'd all cared for Simba but couldn't risk keeping him. Under normal conditions, such a pattern would have Simba labeled as dangerous and possibly put down. But the shelter staff and Stacy refused to let that happen. Now that they understood his behavior, they had a path forward. Simba stayed at the shelter for a few weeks to begin rehabilitation. Other cats were introduced gradually in a safe, monitored environment. It wasn't easy. Simba resisted at first, but the team persisted. The process was long and challenging, but little by little, Simba's aggression faded. He began to trust again. Eventually, he was returned to Stacy's home. The family welcomed him with open arms, and this time things were different. There were no more incidents. Simba integrated peacefully, finally becoming the calm, affectionate cat they always knew he could be. Simba had finally found his forever home. No more shelters, no more cages. Just love, family, and the peace every cat deserved.